Blessed Samhain and happy Witches New Year, everyone. I'm Tiffany, and today I'm going to give you my book review of Intuitive Witchcraft by Astrea Taylor. Astrea Taylor? Astrea? I'm so sorry. I really wanted to cover this review today of all days out of the year because I believe this book is a really great piece of study if one of your Witches New Year resolutions is to work on your intuitive self. Is it a beginner's book? Yes and no. I'll kind of get to that when I get to the pros and cons. The paperback of this book is 360 pages, so it's not an incredibly long read, but it is still a good amount of information. It probably goes without saying, but this book is all about using your intuition as a part of your craft. Taylor starts off with how to build your intuition, how to tap into it, and how to strengthen it. And then she goes on to tell you numerous ways that you can use it in your craft and how to make it an essential part of your spiritual practice. Intuitive Witchcraft is what I like to call a journey book. It is a self-journey book. It's a book of information, resources, and exercises all meant for you to tap into your inner self. Personally, I have found that utilizing intuition is a great way to both strengthen your practice, personalize your spirituality, find what really works for you and what really speaks to you. And it's also all about self-discovery, right? You're sort of getting to know yourself better as you work through this book. If you're interested in purchasing this book, there is a link for it down below in the description box. Now, in addition to that, if you are somebody who is on the go, you are busy, and you just don't have time to read, or maybe you do have time to read, but maybe you get distracted easily or you don't absorb information that well when you're reading it on the page. You're better at listening to absorb information. There's also a link down below for a free 30-day trial to Audible on Amazon. This book, of course, is available in audio format, so I highly encourage you to check that out. So let's get started with my pros and cons, but I usually save my mixed reviews for the end of the pros and cons lists, but this one is something that I view as a big pro that other people might view as a con. It's really just up to personal preference. If you've watched even just a few of my videos, especially my spell videos, you probably know that I am a big fan of use your gut, use your instinct, do what feels right to you, figure out your own correspondences, write your own spells. Take spells and personalize them. I'm all about it. And this book is, well, all about that, which I love personally. But if you are somebody who prefers working with more ceremonial magic or anything like that, this book is probably not for you. I mean, unless you're interested in exploring outside of that realm, then this would be a good book for you. Like if you work with your instincts a lot and you want to get better in tune with your intuition, and not just in a psychic awareness sense, right? Not just in the sense of what is your intuition telling you based on reading the room around you, reading energies, reading people. I don't just mean in that sense. I mean really harnessing your internal voice for your craft and in order to make your magic as you go. If that sounds like you, then this book is probably a little bit more up your alley than somebody who practices more ceremonial magic. But hey, knowledge is knowledge, so even if you practice ceremonial magic and you still want to read this, do so, because this book is very feel it out, right? It's like what I like to say. You don't have to follow the instructions step by step if something doesn't speak to you, if it doesn't feel quite right to you. Listen to your internal voice, do what your internal voice tells you to do. Okay, so pros. I really had to, sorry, I'm looking at my list here. I really had to pick and choose out of my pros because if I listed every pro from this book, I'd basically be giving you a Cliff Notes version, which kind of brings me to my first point. Variety. Oh my God, there is so much in this book, Taylor covers so many different aspects of pagan leaning spirituality and of the craft. Now, she does start off with the building blocks for this, telling you how to tap into your intuition, how to strengthen it, so you don't have to worry about that step being skipped at all. But there were so many valuable tips and tricks that I was so effortlessly able to fit into my pre-existing practice, as well as a lot of new things that maybe I had heard of, but I hadn't really tapped into yet, or I hadn't really thought of working it from the perspective that Taylor provides in the book, that now I'm like, I really want to try those things. But I mean, this book covers everything from starting you off, how to tap into your intuition, and it covers deity, it covers working with spirits, energy work, astral projection, trance work, getting involved in intuitive witchcraft communities, fitting magic into the mundane aspects of your life. There is so much covered. On to my next point. I mentioned a few moments ago about, hey, I wanted to try out a few new things. Well, every chapter has several exercises throughout them, giving you kind of an introductory experience into whatever topic was covered in that chapter. I would recommend spending some time stopping to think about the prompt, especially the ones in the beginning of the book that give you a lot of questions that you need to ask yourself. You should meditate on them, journal about them, whatever your process is. And if there's a more, physical exercise, not like a workout, like an actual activity for you in the exercise, I recommend you try it out and then, sleep on it. Journal about what your experience was like. But there is no like, hey, do this for the next 3 months and then see how you feel and then move on to the next part of this book. I found a lot of the exercises to be very practical as well, fairly easy to do. There was no crazy by this, by that, and very helpful. Even the questions that I mentioned where you just kind of sit, meditate, have a conversation with yourself and journal about it. I found this to be very helpful. I spent a lot of time with that first section of the book journaling and meditating over things, and it kind of helped me tap into my inner child. It really helped me tap into my past, and it had me remembering things that I hadn't thought about in a really long time. There were even parts of my childhood where I sort of dabbled in the craft, both knowing it and not knowing it, that I had completely forgotten that I had done. So it was kind of cool to be guided into that sort of meditation session in order to have those memories come back up and to have those realizations. In addition to exercises, the end of every chapter has a list of further reading. You get an idea of where Taylor is getting her sources from, where she got her information from. But in addition to that, if you found a particular section very interesting, you enjoyed it as sort of an introduction on the topic, and now you want to delve in deeper on that specific thing, well, I mean, there's a book already recommended for you right in this one. But speaking of citing sources, which I love and I appreciate so much, anytime Taylor makes any sort of scientific claim in the book, she cites her source. I really can't stand witchcraft books that make scientific claims related to magic and then don't actually say where they got that information from. When I see that and there's no source cited, I am just instantly like, oh, that's bullshit then. That's not true. So magical and scientific sources, they're all cited. My next point is that there is a whole section, I'm giddy, I don't know if you can tell, there is a whole section all about finding your own personal correspondences. Okay, I have gone on at length in other videos about why I feel it's important to figure out your own correspondences as opposed to following a table of correspondences from a book. So I won't go on and on about my personal opinions on that here, but Taylor does include a section on going through the process of assigning your own meanings to your ingredients. And I really, really wish that information was in way more books. But speaking of that, Taylor also goes into, she does provide a list of information on basic witchcraft tools, but she also stresses the idea that you don't actually need any of them. If you can get them, if you can forge them, find them, or buy them, great. You go ahead, get what you think you need or what you want to work with, but they're not a requirement. They help, yes, but the magic comes from you. Okay, so like, I know I said I wasn't gonna do a Cliff Notes version, but there is one section I really want to talk about, and that is the chapter on working with deity. Now, maybe it's because I personally never went out to specifically research how to work with deity. I did a little bit of online research at the beginning of my pagan journey, my spiritual path, but beyond that, I never really felt a need to go out and like find my own patron deity. That didn't happen until one started calling to me on her own, and then I started doing more research. So maybe there are other books that do this and I just haven't read them. I do know that in the book The Path of Paganism, which I also reviewed up here and linked down below in the description box, John Beckett does go into this a bit, but Taylor's section on this topic is... it is the most in-depth description of working with deity that I have ever come across in a book that wasn't specifically dedicated to working with deity. Taylor provides guidance on how to start researching different gods and goddesses, to look into the ones that you might already feel interested in. She talks about setting up that relationship, appealing to a deity if you have one in mind in particular that you want to work with. She talks about communicating with them, providing offerings, celebrating their holidays. She really nails this section. Okay, there's a lot more on the prose list, but I think that mostly kind of covers the biggest ones and a couple of the more specific ones. So let's move along and talk about the cons. Okay, this book is full of more advanced concepts. And that's great. That's exactly what I was looking for when, I've ranted about this before, when you look for a niche book, usually it's because you already have the basics down. You've been practicing and studying for at least a little while to at least, like I said, have the basics down. But then all of chapter 3 is about very beginner information. I did mention earlier there's a whole list of tools, what they're used for, how to cleanse them, how to cast a circle, so on. And like, okay, fine, this is very good information. It's valuable information for an absolute beginner. As a more advanced practitioner, I found that chapter to be really jarring, especially because you know, chapters 1 and 2, I was getting a nice steady pace and flow going, both with the reading of the book, but also stopping to work on the different exercises that were offered. And then boom, right in the middle of it is a bunch of information that I learned several years ago. Things like grounding and centering, you know, basic foundational practices had already been mentioned earlier in the book. So Taylor assumed that the reader would already have those practices down, that this book was meant to appeal to a little bit more advanced audience. Maybe not, you know, people who've been practicing for years and years, because it is still this would have been a great book for me to have come across, you know, a few months into my practice. It's also still a good book for me to have come across several years into my practice. But I wasn't expecting this book to be something that could have worked on day 1 of my practice. Is it a nice refresher every once in a while to read the foundational stuff? Sure, but there are so many amazing beginners books that are meant for absolute beginners. So I really just wanted the content of this one to be focused on what it was advertised to be focused on. That might just be a personal thing. I know I could just skip that chapter, but I'm a completionist and I can't just skip a chapter in the book because I'm always like, what if there's stuff in there that I'm going to miss out on? And honestly, there wasn't. It was all things that I already knew. Now, I'm not saying that once I got to the advanced portion that there weren't also things in there that I already knew, but at least they were advanced. I might just be being picky though. Maybe I'm being a jerk because I couldn't find many cons for this book, so I had to complain about something. And I don't want to alienate absolute beginners, but like I said, there are so many wonderful beginners books out there. And this book is very much suitable for, I would say, somebody, depending on how much they've been practicing, somebody who's at least a few months into their craft, all the way up to, like me, several years into their craft. I just don't like how that whole chapter could have been dedicated to going into more depth on one of the topics that Taylor sort of just touches on, gives some brief introductory information, and then sends you on your way with an exercise and maybe some additional reading material. I'm just not a big fan of authors shoehorning in all that introductory day one information in a book that just a few chapters later is talking about what even the book refers to as advanced witchcraft. So just a personal thing, I'm not a big fan of that. It really feels like it's just an attempt to appeal to a wider audience as opposed to focusing on what your main audience for a book like this really wants to read. My next con is that the section on sigils was so short, like way too short, and maybe I'm biased because I love sigils. But sigil making, in my experience, is a hugely intuitive practice, so it is absolutely fitting in this book. Like, yes, she covered them, so that's nice. But a little bit more information for those who are absolutely new to sigil making specifically would have been greatly welcomed. Okay, my final con is interesting because it wouldn't be a con if it weren't for that section, chapter 3, that I already complained about with all of the beginner information. I want to read part of this section to you guys really fast. This is from an anecdote that she tells in a section called No Joking Around. Now, I kind of have problems with taking anything too seriously, and that does include spirituality, magic, and witchcraft, but let me set that personal feeling aside for a moment. As witches, our words are so powerful that they can cause things to happen, even if we're just joking. The best example I can think of is the first time I cursed someone, which was an accident. My high school boyfriend was having problems with his basketball rival, who kept scoring on him. He asked me to break his rival's leg with my magic. I laughed but said sure and didn't think of it again. The next day, as they were playing basketball, the rival fell, and wouldn't you know it, he broke his leg. My acceptance of the baneful request enabled the curse to happen. To me, this illustrates how much magic wants to work with us and is just waiting for us to say the words. Okay, so I can really appreciate that last sentence. Magic does want to work with us. The universe wants to grant us what we want, what we desire, and what we need. Sometimes it's just waiting for us to help make the flow happen so things can flow into our lives. So that I don't totally disagree with. However, jokingly saying sure, casting any kind of spell, baneful or otherwise, on accident is very, very rare. Now, I'm not going to speak on Taylor's experience because I'm not trying to discredit her. I'm not trying to discredit the story at all. I just want to point out that this sort of situation, this occurrence, is extremely rare. And the reason that this story in particular being included in this book bothers me is because Taylor does not mention that that sort of thing happening is very rare. All she says is that she jokingly said, sure, and then it happened. She doesn't mention the rarity of that. Now, more advanced practitioners know that that's the case, that these things are very, very rare. But I've gotten so many comments on videos, emails from younger practitioners, people who are very, very new that are already treading lightly into their practice and on their path because they are worried about accidentally doing things or accidentally hurting somebody or accidentally contacting and summoning a demon. Many practitioners in the beginning, especially if they're younger, are frightened very easily. And I don't like the idea that's being put forth here, especially, like I said, because it contains chapter 3 with all of that very, very basic, rudimentary information. I don't like the idea of anybody young and or new to the craft reading that and going, oh, now I'm scared to practice any magic at all, because what if I make a joke, a one-word joke, and then suddenly I break someone's leg? So I just think that section in particular is problematic. To be fair though, that is the only section like that. It's not like this book is riddled with little anecdotes that, you know, could give people the wrong idea. There's nothing, this is the only one. So that's it. If you have already read this book or you've started reading this book, leave it down in the comments below. Let me know what your thoughts were on it, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, whether you loved it or hated it. If you enjoyed my review, make sure to hit the thumbs up. And once again, if you're interested in reading this book yourself, the link for it is down below in the description box. You can get it as an audiobook, in Kindle format, or paperback. That's it for today, everyone. Once again, happy Witches New Year. I hope you're having a wonderful Samhain today, and I'll see you all next month. Oh yes, stay magical.